So what did you do in high school?
High school, I was really just kind of one of those skater kids. I worked a lot. I was working full time from the age of pretty much 15, 16, and just went to school, lived with my mom and my sister, and was just trying to figure out the next steps of my life.
So after you completed high school, what got into your life that you wanted to join the Marines or join the service?
Initially, nothing. I did the first year at community college. I was paying for it myself and working full time. Quickly realized that I couldn't afford that anymore. And some really close friends of mine had entered the Marine Corps, so I decided to talk to all the different recruiters of all the different services to see which would best fit my life. And I remember the Marine Corps one was the last one I wanted to talk to, because I don't think I was necessarily ready for a commitment of the Marine Corps versus any of the other branches. And then I went to the Marine Corps recruiter. He showed me all the different programs that were available, and the ultimate decision, or the ultimate reason that led me to joining the Marine Corps over the other branches, was all the other branch recruiters were like used car salesmen. They were just calling me all the time, trying to get me to come sign the contract. And after I met with the Marine Corps recruiter last, he said, "Look, I'm not going to call you. I'm not going to bother you after this." He goes, "You have all the information. You either want to be a fucking Marine or you don't." And when he said that, I was like, "Okay, let's sign up." So I decided to join the Marine Corps over the other branches based on that input from the recruiter.
As time went on, you went through the tests beforehand, or did you do it later on?
No, I did all the testing beforehand, and I realized that I just needed to get the heck out of Dodge. I needed to get out of my town and do something different. So I signed up for open contract and went to basic training in May of 1998.
We'll go to the standard jumping out of the bus or out the windows of the bus to find your yellow footprints. So what was going on in your mind at that point?
Really, what the hell was I thinking? The bus ride going from Chicago to MCRD San Diego, you just travel with this big manila envelope, and showed up in San Diego. They corral everybody onto a bus, and everybody's still kind of nice at that point. No yelling, no screaming. And then when you pull up into MCRD San Diego, before getting off the bus on yellow footsteps, a drill instructor, not necessarily your drill instructor, a drill instructor gets on the bus with that big old drill hat and puts his arms on his waist and looks around a little bit, and you're like, okay, this isn't that bad. And then all hell breaks loose, and they start screaming, getting everybody off the bus, getting everybody on the yellow footprints. And when you get off, I don't remember how many people it was total, but there were a lot of us. And a slew of drill instructors kind of swarm everybody, start screaming at everybody, poking their fingers in your chest, getting in your face and screaming. And I just continued to think, what the hell did I just do to myself? What did I sign myself up for? And then from there, the first thing they take you to do is get a haircut. And they weren't very, I should have shaved my head beforehand, but I didn't. And they weren't very gentle, and everybody pretty much ends up with cuts all over their head because they're just jamming the shaver onto your head to cut your hair.
So you spent the night, or what time did you arrive?
It was evening time when I arrived, and you didn't really sleep for about 3 or 4 days. They just throw all this paperwork at you. They're starting to give you all these shots and injections, and they really try to deprive you of sleep to break you down and to test your limits. And I remember before joining, everybody asks me about my signature now and why it's so bad. And I remember when I joined, I had a decent signature. And then after 3 days of just consistently signing your name and signing and signing and signing, I just came up with a quick, easy signature that remotely resembled my name. And 3 or 4 days go by, you get assigned your platoon, and then you get your barracks, and it was really all just a blur. We got one phone call at that time Obviously, internet still wasn't that big of a thing, so we got one phone call, I think 2 days in, to let our parents know that we were there, that we were safe, and that we were checked in.
So you went for the typical clothes thrown at you, pack your bag, just get it into your bag and get to the barracks and undo it. So what was your first real wake up with the tin can?
The first real wake up, we were woken up around 05, went and did PT, went to the chow hall, and I think I finished maybe a quarter of my meal, the first meal, if a quarter of my meal, because you're rushed. So you don't realize that day that you've really just got to kind of use a bulldozer and bulldoze the food in your mouth, get it in your mouth, and get out. And that was it, because they give you no time. So all etiquette and everything that you'd learned in the past goes completely out the window, and you just got to shove the food in your mouth and get the food in there and get out. So I remember like the first 2 weeks just kind of pretty much being hungry all the time, because it takes so long to get used to putting that quantity of food in your mouth that quick.
So spending your time on the grinder, usually calisthenics out there. Did anybody in your barracks have any problems or anything?
The first real incident we had was about a week or two in. We had one individual who just couldn't follow directions. You know, everything in Marine Corps boot camp, when you go, it's all by the numbers. So you don't get dressed by yourself, you don't go to the bathroom by yourself, you don't eat by yourself. Everything is, you're doing exactly what you're told when you're told. So it was put your left sock on now, put your right sock on now, change your underwear now, put your pants on, left pant leg on now, right pant leg on now. And we had one guy just couldn't get his stuff together, so we ended up getting dressed and undressed from about 05 in the morning until about 1700 in the afternoon. And of course they were continually hydrating us by coming by and just dumping water in our mouths, and nobody could go to the bathroom. Everybody just stood there getting dressed and undressed by the numbers for 12 hours. And it was that day, I think, that myself and everybody else kind of realized it was no joke. And we had to do what the drill instructors were saying. So it was just that one individual who just couldn't get it done. Just kept lagging behind. I always make a reference to Full Metal Jacket with Private Pile and how we just couldn't do anything right. Well, we definitely had a Private Pile. And all my friends that I know who went to boot camp before or after me kind of had the same thing. They had a Private Pile, and everybody suffered because of it. But the goal was to make you kind of build cohesion within the unit.
So once you completed your boot camp, where were you off to from there?
From there, I went to the School of Infantry at luxurious Camp Lejeune. And then from Camp Lejeune, my first real introduction to how things worked in the Marine Corps, they brought out the dream sheet of where everybody wanted to go. So my dream sheet said 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, Camp Pendleton, California. I'd only spent basic training boot camp in California, and I enjoyed the weather, I enjoyed the scenery. So I said I wanted to go back to California, wrote it down on the list, and then a week later, something like that, got my orders, and it said 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, 29 Palms, California. So I went to the gunnery sergeant, the gunny, and I said, "Hey Gunny," I was a PFC at the time. I said, "Hey Gunny, I think there's a mistake on my orders. I signed up for 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines in Camp Pendleton, and this says 29 Palms." And the gunny just laughed. He said, "Yeah, it used to be at Camp Pendleton. It moved to 29 Palms a couple of years ago, but we never changed it on the dream sheet because otherwise nobody would volunteer for it." So I ended up in 29 Palms, California with 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines.
Anything stands out during your time at infantry training?
No, it was miserable. You weren't treated as poorly as you were when you were in boot camp, but you were still treated poorly because you were still considered a new Marine. Everybody called you boot, and it was 3 months of misery, of just hiking, camping out, just running around the entire time, just wearing your body down and learning all the TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures at the time of how to be an infantryman.
Once you completed infantry school, where were you off to from there?
When I got to 29 Palms, California, my introduction to my platoon was basically, okay, here's your room, here's your roommate, here's your bunk, but you're not allowed to sleep on your bunk until we tell you you can sleep on your bunk. So I slept on the tile floor underneath my bunk for about a month and they did that with everybody until they proved themselves that they were quote unquote worthy of sleeping on a normal bed.
Yeah, you had to keep that spread tight.
Yeah.
If you slept in, that couldn't happen.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, so anything else stands up?
No, it's my roommate was a guy who I was in SOI with. We did not like each other, and we ended up getting stuck in 29 Palms together and becoming roommates. And now he's been a lifelong friend ever since 1998. I just remember it being the first couple months just absolute misery, and then we do a lot of field exercises and training events out there in the desert, and then we deployed to Okinawa, Japan, which was really neat. I loved Okinawa, but it was in Okinawa that I realized I didn't want to just go back and forth. There wasn't a lot going on in the world at that time, and I didn't want to go back and forth just from 29 Palms to Okinawa, so I volunteered for the Marine Security Guard program, the MSG program, which is a contract with the Department of State where Marines provide internal security to U.S. embassies and consulates abroad.
What kind of training did that put you into?
The MSG program, you report to Quantico, Virginia, and you're really, the training is a lot. It was about 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day. And that include the formal training where you're in the classroom, you're doing PT, you're learning about the program, how to stand watch. They immediately break you down into what they call detachments, which are what they use in the embassies. So you and your detachment work, and you have to stand duty. You have to make sure your uniforms are straight. There's a slew of tests that you have to be able to pass. You have psych evals the entire time you're there. Psych profiles that they build on you to help figure out if you can go to a high threat post or if you don't go to a high threat post. And it was hectic days, and just nonstop. When you get off, we would quote unquote get off at about 1700 every day, but you had so much to do to prep for the next day, to include uniforms, because you had to make sure your uniforms were perfect. And there was an in-ranks inspection every single day to check your uniform and make sure it was perfect. So you really didn't get to bed until about midnight-ish with all the studying and uniform prep you had to do for the next day, which started at 05 every day with PT.
Once the completion of that course, did you get a chance to come home, or before you?
They did give us, you got the chance to take some leave. I took some leave beforehand. So I decided just to go straight to my duty station because I didn't have a lot of leave on the books. So I got assigned to Bogota, Colombia, right around Halloween of 2000.
So what was that post like?
Showing up, Bogota at that point had really just kind of ended their war with Pablo Escobar. The narcos were still fighting for territory throughout the country. The FARC, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, and the ELN, the National Liberation Army of Colombia, were still very strong and prominent all throughout Bogota and all throughout the country. They maintained two mountains surrounding Bogota in order to be able to launch attacks on the government and government forces from there. But I remember the first day showing up at the airport, and again asking myself, what did I just volunteer myself for? Because the airport was something you see out of the movies today. It was just very run down, very third world, really no security anywhere whatsoever, just people all over the place. I spoke zero Spanish at the time, so it was just hard to get in, get my bags, and then the detachment commander met me at the baggage claim area. And as soon as we got in the car, he was asking me if I had a suit. I said, well, of course I do, Staff Sergeant Caleb Eames, who I still talk to today. And I said, yes, I have a suit. He said, okay, is it fresh? I said, well, yes, it's fresh. He said, okay, well, we're going to a wedding. I was like, is that the best idea ever to go to a wedding in this country? Because it was just complete and utter chaos in Bogota at that time. And we went to a wedding of a former MSG who was there and was marrying a local. And from there, it was just, the country itself, the people. It was fun. It was a really good time. It was a good place to be stationed. It was interesting as a 20-year-old young man to see how a third world country in Latin America at that time operated or didn't operate, and the amount of corruption and politics that were in play throughout the country.
Does anything stand out in your mind? I'm sure when you got time off a little bit, you went into the city, or anything stand out in your mind?
It was really, the city and everything. Even though I was a young Marine making about $900 a month, because that was before 9/11 and all the pay raises that followed. I was a corporal when I got there, and it was really interesting to see how everybody thought, because we were Americans, that we had all this money to do whatever we wanted. And technically speaking, in Colombia at that time, the exchange rate was about 5,000 pesos to $1 US. So our dollar went a very, very far way. We could really, live a life as a corporal in the Marine Corps in Bogota that there was no possibility of living in the United States, whether it be going out to eat, going out to drink, whatever it was. There was, technically the drinking age was 18 in Colombia, but we quickly found going out that nobody really abided by that. You go to a club or a bar and there'd be teenagers in there drinking, partying, going crazy. So it was eye-opening, to say the least.
Did you get a chance to attend any kind of social events other than when you were on duty?
So yes, we attended a lot of social events, but then at that time we would also host parties at the Marine House. So in Bogota, the Marine House was on compound right next to the embassy, about 150 feet away, and we would host these social events to raise money for the Marine Corps Ball, which was, I didn't know at the time, but I later found out in my Army Attaché life, that was like the social event of the capital, because it would be all these different military commanders. The president came to the ball when I was there, so we'd use those social events at the Marine House to sell our t-shirts, sell alcohol, and the attachés, the political section, economics, DEA, everybody would bring outsiders in, all their local contacts in for these parties in order to bolster their relationship with these people, and getting them onto the U.S. Embassy compound was kind of like the, hey, look what I could do. I can bring in the compound, and the locals would use, oh, I was just at the U.S. Embassy for a party. So it was a lot of fun. We raised a lot of money and used all those funds to go towards the Marine Corps Ball, not just for the embassy personnel, not just for the Marines, but what I later learned 20 years later was for all the different agencies that were at the embassy to bring in their important guests, because it was a very, very formal event. It was a black tie event, and it was really like a huge gala, and the big social event of the time.
Now, at some point, you met your wife?
Yes, I met my ex-wife there about 7, 8 months into my tour. She was a friend of a friend from the Regional Security Office, who are the Department of State personnel that provide security for the embassy as well, but they were more at that time, they provided 24/7 security for the ambassador. So I met her through a friend of mine. We hit it off and just started dating and continued to date even when I left Bogota, until we got married in 2003.
So Was it 2003 you left Bogota, or is it?
No, I left Bogota in mid-2002 and I went to Tel Aviv, Israel for my next duty station, and she had come to visit a couple times in Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv should have been a interesting post.
Yes, so I originally was supposed to go to Switzerland or Sweden, but the brigade commander had come to Bogota to do an inspection and visit the troops with the sergeant major, and I had orders in hand for, I can't remember if it was Sweden or Switzerland, and they asked me, they said, hey, Tel Aviv is a high security threat post, it's a high FIS for an intelligence service post, would you like to go to Tel Aviv instead? And of course, a young, I think I was promoted to sergeant by that time. A young sergeant in the Marine Corps is not going to say no to the colonel or the sergeant major. Like, no, I don't want to go to Tel Aviv. So I said, yeah, that's fine. I'll go to Tel Aviv. Got there, and a couple weeks after I got there, the second intifada had started back up, where Hezbollah and Hamas had really started to attack the capital. At that time, Tel Aviv was the capital because of the politics, and Jerusalem was just a consulate. So it was a hairy time. And our house, the Marine house, was not on compound. The embassy was in an old hotel on the beach, which was amazing. Our house was about, as the crow flies, 20-30 minutes north, but traffic in Tel Aviv was a nightmare, so it could take up to an hour and a half. So there were many times when things would happen where all the Marines would have to get to the embassy, and because of traffic, we would end up having to ride our bikes. There was a bike trail that went all the way from where we lived in Herzliya along the ridges of the coast and the mountains of the coast all the way down to Tel Aviv, so we would just ride our bikes in.
So, anything stand out in your mind during that period of time that brought your hair up in the back of your neck?
Every day my hair was up on the back of my neck because there was always an attack. Whether it be a nightclub, there was a nightclub that we had just left because we had a curfew there. And it was blown up about 20 minutes after we left there. Then there was a bar right next to the embassy called Joe's Bar, literally 50 feet outside the back gate of the embassy on the beach. It was called Joe's Bar, owned by an expat, and two suicide bombers approached that when we were in there. Only one partially got in because at that time every single social venue, including restaurants, had private security that was working outside to try and stop those things from happening. So luckily the private security did stop the first suicide bomber from getting in. He stopped him right at the doorway, and he detonated himself, and the other one ran at that time. And it was just kind of a blur. All I know is that we all just started to provide first aid to everybody that was there. We found Canadian dollars, so we were worried that there were other North Americans that were in the area, but come to find out, the bombers were recruited from Canada, both of them. So they had come in, and they still had, the one guy had Canadian dollars in his pocket, and his head, as you're walking out, was stuck in the rafters at the entrance. Just his head, just sitting up there, stuck in the rafters, and then his body was blown to pieces. And somehow the security guard who stopped him was unscathed, not a scratch on him. And it was just the projection, the way the vest was built, it was projected to go out, and the gentleman that stopped him, standing right in front of him, it just went all the way around him and didn't touch him. And it was interesting to see the Israeli government response to all of these bombings, because it wasn't a private insurance thing there. Their insurance paid for it, but the Israeli government augmented and helped them, and I think it was a matter of 2-3 weeks until the bar was complete, like nothing happened. And they used that as strategic messaging to the terrorists to basically show, like, we're going to continue to live our life, you can't affect us. And also at that time, I remember sitting down we had a maid that worked for us at the time for all the Marines, because it was just easier, cleaned, cooked, and everything. We were all sitting down eating breakfast, watching TV when the Iraq invasion happened. And then that night we were sitting out. We had a pool on the compound, and we were sitting out, looking towards the beach, and we could just see missiles flying overhead, back and forth, and them being intercepted. So the terrorists used that to launch some attacks from Lebanon into Israel, and we could just watch the fireworks. Luckily, at that time, Israel, as always, they had our support, and we had a Patriot battery up on the northern border. So the Patriot battery was very active in launching counter strikes.
At some point, your tour duty ended. What transpired at that time?
So at that time, I decided, because the Illinois Veterans Grant, which is a grant provided by the state of Illinois, if you entered military service from Illinois and you returned to Illinois within 6 months after getting out of military service, they would pay for your tuition to any state-funded school. So I decided to get out and use that, coupled with the Montgomery GI Bill, which basically provided the Montgomery GI Bill was meant to pay for college, but if college was paid for, it ended up just going into your pocket as living money. So I decided to get out and go back to Chicago and go to college, got married, and then in Bogota, and then went back to Chicago and started my college. Continued my education.
So, was that 2 years, 3 years?
It was 4 years.
4 years. Okay. You didn't bring your other credits or anything there.
I didn't do well in college the first time, so I didn't even bring those credits in because they were horrible marks and grades.
So, what transpired then?
I did my 4 years in college. I was still married with my my wife at the time, and after 4 years, I started working as a regional manager for an insurance company with my best friend from the Marine Corps. And after about 6 months in, I just realized I didn't like it. I wanted to get back into government service, so I talked to my wife and I said, look, I want to join the military. This sales life isn't for me right now. And she was in agreement with it, so I joined the Army, and we quickly divorced after that. So I joined the Army in 2008 and went to Officer Candidate School, OCS. It was 3 months long, and while I was in OCS, I was selected to serve in military intelligence.
So, where did you go first training for that?
Well, at that time, after Officer Candidate School, you had to do what was called BOLC 2, Basic Officer Leadership Course 2, and it was really just 8 weeks of field training exercise. That's all it was. Just 8 weeks running around the field, and that was also at Fort Benning, Georgia, or Fort Moore now. So conducted that, and then went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona for MI training for the basic course. And then from there, I was based in Washington State at Fort Lewis. Now it's Lewis-McChord. It's Joint Base Lewis-McChord. And I was assigned to the 201st Battlefield Surveillance Brigade. And my first job was I was the executive officer for a humans company and the platoon leader of a human platoon.
So what did that entail?
The human platoon, so the 201st Battlefield Surveillance Brigade it had just stood up about 8 months before I got there. So we were still standing it up, trying to get equipment, trying to get everything fielded that we needed because we were already identified to deploy to Iraq in 2009. So we had about a little over a year by the time I got there to get everything stood up and get everything ready for deployment. So it was really training soldiers, making sure that they were ready for deployment, making sure equipment was ready, doing a bunch of exercises with the infantry, because the idea behind the human platoon is that the different human teams would split up and disperse in Iraq to different teams of infantrymen to try and help them gain human intelligence in order to get high-value targets.
The time to get everything, equipment, personnel, get it all together, how long did that take?
even when we deployed, I don't know that we had all of our equipment. We got a lot of the equipment once we got to Kuwait, because we didn't get issued everything in time in Fort Lewis. So we got to Kuwait and just took over some of the old battalions that had left, took over some of their equipment.
Now you said that your first tour, everybody who came over always hit Kuwait first
Yes.
and then moved on. Why was that?
What's the written rule, or what we all believe? Going to Kuwait, it makes you want to leave Kuwait and go to Iraq, because Kuwait is just miserable. Living in those giant tents. Sometimes there was air conditioning, sometimes there wasn't. But the real point was to get out into the desert that was similar to Iraq and start patrolling and conducting missions in an area that was safe from combatants and from the people we're going to be combating against. So it was a preparation time just to get ready to go to Iraq. And by the time the 2 weeks is up, everybody was ready by day 2 to get the heck out of Kuwait, because it was just nasty hot.
Climatize you.
Yeah.
So then your unit moved on north. And
Yes.
you go up by truck, or you go up by...
So we went up, depending on where the human teams were stationed, some went up by convoys, some went up by airplane, some went up by helicopter. I was originally at Mosul, Diamondback Mosul, so we all went up by airplane for the headquarters. Got to Mosul, and then within a week of being in Mosul, started traveling around to see my teams, check with the infantry PLs, the infantry companies, to make sure that the teams were providing what they needed to provide, to see if there was any extra equipment they needed, do welfare checks on the teams, go on patrols with the teams, and make sure that they were conducting the mission as that was needed per the infantry.
You had said when you first got there that the teams were not, under the old commander, the teams were not going out and engaging with the troops out in the field to learn more what was going on. How did you rectify that?
So if there was ever any issue, the company commanders of the infantry, the platoon leaders, had my contact information direct, and they could contact me. Luckily, I had some really good teams, and they were providing everything they needed to, so they were under operational control to the infantry, but they were still under administrative control to myself. So operationally, the infantry guys, the infantry companies took care of them. They got them all the equipment that they may or may not need. The whole point of them being with the infantry was they had to live, eat, and breathe and look just like the infantry guys, so that they didn't stand out when they were out trying to identify human sources. And so it was really, luckily I never had to provide anything to them, because they were all really good team leaders and really good teams, so the infantrymen brought them in and made them their own. But there were some teams that in other companies that just weren't conducting the mission as they were supposed to, so there was some shuffling. I had to move some of my teams over to some hotter areas in order to supplement the infantry and do the mission a little better, and then swap some teams with other companies in some more lower profile areas.
Now, would your teams gather that by just going into the village and talking to the head person, or cash money, or
Various ways. There was cash rewards for it. So they would go out and they would meet with people, and while they were out meeting with people, they would assess what placement and access that person they were meeting with had, or if it was just random intelligence, or there would be walk-ins to the post where somebody would come in completely covered up and meet with the teams on the FOB, the Forward Operating Base. They would interview them and continuously meet with them and get human intelligence from them. And they would use a lot of that human, they could get a cell phone number and then corroborate it with signals intelligence, or not corroborate it and prove that it was false and that it was not a good source. But nobody was paid until there was a mission conducted against that person they were trying to conduct the mission against. A successful mission conducted against them, I should say.
So when you were over there, you went out with your teams and had to go out to your teams. Did you ever run across any IEDs or things like that?
When I was the human PL, no, but about 6 months into deployment, I switched to, I was a multifunction team, MFT team leader. And the idea of that team is they're kind of like the hunters, so to speak. So they have specialized equipment that's in the same backpack that an infantryman would carry. It's just tailored on the inside to carry the specialized equipment to be able to go into an area. So they had human, CI, and SIGINT. And the idea was the human would collect all the basic original information, we'd corroborate it with the SIGINT, and then we had specialized equipment that we could, if we knew somebody was going to be in an area, if an HVT was going to be in an area, we would go on patrol in that area, and they had specialized equipment to pinpoint exactly where that person was at that time. And then we detain the person. So those patrols were rather contentious, and there were IEDs, there were a couple ticks, trips in contact during that, but Iraq wasn't anywhere as bad as I thought it would be.
So, at the end of that tour, did you get a chance to come home?
I did. I met my current wife before deployment, who was in the same battalion, and we did a mid-tour leave in Spain rather than coming back to the States, because we were already there and it was only 2 weeks and it would take 2-3 days just to travel. So you really only got 9-10 days back home, and with the time adjustments and everything, we just decided to go to Spain. And then when we got back to Fort Lewis, Washington, my family met us there for the return. And then we traveled around a little bit between Houston, Texas, where her family was and is, between there and Chicago to see family.
So, where did you, after you got home for a little while, what happened then?
So my wife was a captain at the time. I was a lieutenant. I was waiting promotion to captain, which came 6 months after. She was getting ready to go to the captain's career course because she was 2 years ahead of me. So we decided to get married. So we got married so that we could go to the captain's career course together, because the military doesn't care if you're just dating. You have to be married. So we went to the captain's career course together. And when we were there, we were put on work details because our class wasn't ready to start yet, but they want to get you there early for whatever reason, for some possible extra trainings. And I ended up doing source operations course out of Tucson, Arizona, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Not Davis-Monthan, that's in Ohio. No, it is Davis-Monthan. It's right, Pat, that's in Ohio. Mm-hmm. So we ended up doing the SOC course in Tucson for 3 months. And it's a specialized human training. So you've got your basic humanter, and then you've got the person that's qualified to recruit up to category 2 sources. So I can recruit a source, I can task a source in order to go get information and bring me that information. And the course is designed about all around how to spot and assess those sources, to figure out what placement and access they have, what information they can provide. Everything was in civilian clothes in Tucson, and you'd have to confront a role player in a bookstore, in a coffee shop, set up meet and greets with them. You had to do surveillance detection routes prior to meeting with them to make sure you weren't being followed. It was very much a gentleman's course. You stayed off post in a hotel, which was considered free reign, so you had to keep your hotel sanitized at all times. They would conduct random traffic stops in civilian vehicles, and you would know, I can't remember what the signal was, but there was a certain signal if there was a civilian vehicle, quote unquote, pulling you over. You would know you'd have to pull over, and they were not friendlies. They were terrorist organizations of some sort conducting these traffic stops, because you pretended we were in another country, and they would search your car, and then if they searched your car and found anything, they'd detain you and start questioning you. If you didn't show up on time, I mean, it was a refreshing course in the fact that everything I'd been to up until that time was all about the numbers. So basic training, or OCS, you could be the biggest goob on the face of the planet and you're still going to graduate. Same with the MI basic course. You could not know what you're doing and you were going to pass because they needed the numbers. This course was nothing like that. The day of graduation, the morning of graduation, we had 2 or 3 people that were kicked out because they didn't meet the standard. I believe we had about a 40% graduation rate, just based on the details of the course. You know, prior to meeting with somebody, and prior to designating a meeting spot, whether it be a restaurant, whether it be a hiking trail, whatever it was, you had to conduct recons, you had to draw sketches of where you were going to meeting, and everything had to be extremely detailed. So it was refreshing to see that they weren't just allowing anybody to get through that course.
Was there any one particularly thing that you liked, like counter surveillance, or, you know, that really perked your interest?
I loved honestly, everything about that course I loved. I was selected to go to ASOC, Advanced Source Operations course after that, which is a 6-month course, and it's how to recruit Cat 1 personnel. So there's Cat 1 through Cat 3, Cat 1 being the highest, and that is really where it's more of a covert type course. You're living, you know, Cat 2, you are who you are, but you're recruiting that person. Cat 1, it's more of a covert course. And unfortunately, because the unit I was going to was deploying right away to Afghanistan, I didn't get permissions to go. But it was every aspect of that course I loved. I loved every single aspect of it.
So, you packed up your bag and off to Afghanistan. Where did you end up over there?
Well, my wife and I, we packed up, we went to Fort Carson. She was a captain at the time, and she went to 4th Infantry Division headquarters, which ended up being a godsend because I was in a very kinetic, dynamic AO in Afghanistan in Kunar province, and I deployed 2 weeks after we got to Fort Carson, Colorado, and it was, I say godsend because she had access to all the different networks that we were operating on, and when something happens in Afghanistan or any combat area, if someone dies, they shut down all of the non-classified networks so people can't message their families and send preempted messages before an investigation was done, or let a family know that someone died who actually didn't die. So I could send her messages on the secret networks to say, hey, this happened, I was there, I wasn't there, I'm okay, don't worry.
Again, did you go out and meet with different groups of people when you got there, or?
So when I got to Kunar, I became the battalion S2 for 212 Infantry Battalion, and part of the reason of me going to that battalion, one, was because of my human qualifications, and the battalion commander needed somebody that could, by his side, that could run sources. So I was out with the battalion commander quite a bit, all the time. And then I had 10 green suiters, 10 soldiers, green suiters, 2 lieutenants, about 5 contractors at the peak, and then I had intelligence people dispersed all throughout the infantry battalions as a liaison to be able to communicate better and do the intel speak and pass the intelligence to the company commanders and to the platoons that were out conducting operations all the time.
At one point, someone was going to meet somebody, and you suggested that he start changing his routes. Could you go into that story?
Yeah, so one of the things I did when I got there was my teams didn't, my leadership, my soldiers, nobody, they didn't go out to the infantry units at all. So I made sure that they traveled a lot and did patrols with the infantry. And then it was in August of 2012, we had received intelligence that there were 2 suicide bombers that were going to attack our convoys or attack our mission. One of the biggest meetings we had monthly was a Shura at the governmental headquarters, and our battalion commander, myself, and a couple other people were supposed to be going to the governmental headquarters. We had everything planned out the day before. I advised of a possible suicide bomber threat, and the battalion commander got called to the brigade headquarters that night, so he had to fly to the brigade headquarters, and then from the brigade headquarters he flew with the brigade commander James Mingus, Colonel James Mingus, who's now a 4-star, and he's the Deputy Army Chief of Staff. So they ended up flying into a separate base, and the convoy met them at that base, and then everybody walked to the governmental headquarters because it was walking distance. And the suicide bomber plan didn't attack the convoy because things had changed and the convoy ended up taking a different route. But they got wind of it, and as everybody was walking from the base to the governmental headquarters, which was half a mile maybe, one suicide bomber entered the formation, and Lieutenant Florent Groberg at the time basically latched on to the chest of that suicide bomber and tackled him. Flo ended up living, but he lost about 30% of his right leg and was medevaced. The second bomber took off, but because of Flo's actions, that second bomber left, and Flo later received the Medal of Honor for it. And there were 4 individuals, to include the Brigade Sergeant Major, Command Sergeant Major Griffin, the USAID representative, our senior fires officer, and our senior JTAC for the brigade. They all lost their lives in the event, and there were multiple injuries, to include my battalion commander, my battalion sergeant major. They were both medevaced out, but ended up coming back about 4 days later. And yeah, I mean, all because of Flo. There were only 4 lives lost. I say only, but there were 4 lives lost instead of God knows how many more, because that other suicide bomber, Flo, hadn't tackled that person. I strongly believe that they would have entered the formation, but that person fled, and luckily enough, his suit ended up detonated on him as he was fleeing, and only killed him. Within the first 2 weeks of getting there and traveling throughout Afghanistan and getting to know the AOR, went out with a unit somewhere in the Peshawar Valley, I can't remember exactly where, and as we're on patrol, we immediately got pinned down from a village, and I just remember bouncing around and helping like the mortarmen, trying to just assist in any way I could. As a former enlisted guy and everything, I knew that as an officer, I was the highest ranking one there, but I knew I couldn't go in and take over for the lieutenant who was the PL, so I just kind of followed their lead. Said, where do you need me? What do you need me to do? And just helped with suppressing fire. And it got to the point where we couldn't even suppress it, and we had a JTAC, so an Air Force Joint Tactical Air Controller with us. We had to call in some GBUs, which that was the first time I'd ever seen anything of that magnitude. So we called in 2 500-pound GBUs, and it was just the explosions were just insane.
Yeah, pressure wave, you see it.
Yeah. We only had one guy, I believe there was only one guy that got hit in the shoulder during that, and he ended up being fine, but the GBUs were just, it was just incredibly impressive. So after that, we were able to get out and return, but it was honestly, it was perfect, because I had my intel guys with me that weren't allowed to go out before. So it really helped them get a clear view rather than just sitting in a fob, because they had been there for a month and a half before I got there, of just sitting in a fob and hearing these stories of the guys who were out on the ground and these things happening. So they then saw the terrain and how and why the intelligence that we were receiving, whether it be human, SIGINT, OSINT, whatever it was, why it was so important, and they were better able to read through it and decipher it because they were learning the AO.
Now, and any other experiences where you were out traveling with the troops?
There were multiple times that our vehicles were hit. One of the best friends that I made during that time was Staff Sergeant Aaron Sanko, which I know, officers aren't supposed to be friends with enlisted, or whatever, but he was in charge of some of the security for the battalion commander, and he would take me out a lot when the battalion commander didn't go out and I had to go meet with sources. And the biggest one was we had received intelligence that every month we went to Ashura with the local government, and it was at the governmental headquarters. And we'd received intelligence, and I passed all the intelligence to my leadership that there were 2 suicide bombers waiting to attack a formation. So things changed a little bit. Originally it was supposed to be us convoying with the battalion commander to the governmental headquarters, but he had to go to the brigade headquarters. So he ended up flying in a helicopter to one of the bases close by. And our convoy wasn't hit because the governmental headquarters was walking distance from the other base. So the convoy wasn't hit. But one suicide bomber entered the formation. Florent Flo Groberg ended up not winning, but he got the Medal of Honor for his actions during that. The suicide bomber that did get into the formation, he was able to push back. We still lost 4 personnel that day, one from three military, one from USAID, but he was able to push that suicide bomber back and tackle him to where luckily there were only 4 people killed, a dozen injured. He lost about 30% of his leg from it, but his actions caused the other suicide bomber to run off. So their plan was for one to come in, explode, and then as we're dealing with that, the other one to come in. But because of his actions, the other suicide bomber got scared and took off. That was the biggest one. The battalion commander, the command sergeant major of the battalion were killed. The brigade sergeant major, command sergeant major was killed, Sergeant Major Griffin. And then we lost our Air Force liaison, we lost the USAID person, and we lost our senior fires, our brigade fires individual. 3 majors, and then the USAID individual, and that was in August of 2011, and then we departed in December so everything after that was just kind of a blur. I do remember being stuck in a porta potty for about 2 hours because I had to go to the bathroom, and we all of a sudden just started receiving incoming. So the porta potties there, we had them under cement structures as to protect them so people don't get killed on the shitter. So I remember being stuck in there for a while, and then I think it was after about 2 hours I said screw this and ran out, and then finally got to the headquarters. Also during that time, our brigade XO, Mark Evazai, I remember at one point we had people trying to come onto base during one of the incoming attacks, and he ran out in his little silkies and a helmet and his M4, and we all just started dispersing to protect the base. Afghanistan is a completely different culture, and it's just, in my opinion, a disgusting culture. I had to work a lot with the Afghan military, and went to a meeting one day and walked in on an Afghan colonel raping a 12-year-old boy. And now, as I have a son, at that time I just walked away because we couldn't do anything. That wasn't within our purview. That's not what we were there for. But now with a son, it's just disgusting. Just seeing the way they treat women, seeing women who are violated and stoned to death because they were violated, but it's a disgrace to their family. And then after Afghanistan, I realized I don't ever want to go back to that hellhole. My wife was set. She was working at the division headquarters, and she was supposed to deploy in April. And we talked, and we said, okay, well, if you're going to deploy, we're only going to be together for 4 months, because I just got back on December 12th. I said, so, let's figure this out. And I had volunteered to switch to division so that I could deploy with them, even though I didn't want to. And then it was January or February of 2013 that I was picked up. I was selected to become a foreign area officer for Latin America. And her and I talked about it in depth. And because I had so much Marine Corps time, we decided that I could retire earlier than she could, not younger, because I'm 5 years older, but we decided that I could retire earlier than she could, and she really didn't want to deploy because her boss at the time was just miserable to work for. So we decided for her to go ahead and resign her commission, and that I would go to the foreign area officer route, even though I'm certain she would have made general officer had she stayed in, but she would have had to stay in a lot longer than I would have to be able to retire.
So when you took on the additional assignment now, did you have any idea what was coming or what was going on for you, what you were going to be doing? I'm sure you went to classes and this and that, but that doesn't often touch what reality is.
I did. No, I did, because I'd worked in the embassies before, and that's where most of the FAO's work is, either at the combat commands, the COCOMs, the ASCC, the service component commands, or at the embassies. I had a good idea of what it was. I just knew when I came back in December that Afghanistan was a place I never ever wanted to return to again. So it was kind of one of those, okay, well, if she goes and wants to stay in, I'll go with her. But I didn't. It was a place that just left me in a kind of a dark place for a while, and I knew I didn't want to go back. So when we decided to accept for an area officer, the training is actually, there's no real course for FAO. So the pipeline is, there's a course called the Joint Foreign Area Officer course, which is 1 week. Doesn't really do a lot. After that, they send you to language, which I had already spoken Spanish from my time in Colombia. So they sent me to learn Haitian Creole in DC, which I used for a total of 10 days in the past 13 years as a FAO. So good use of resources. And then after you do language, they send you to live and work in an embassy overseas. And they do that, it's more of like an OJT. So you live and work in this embassy in the Security Cooperation Office, and you do random projects as dictated by the SCO, or the Security Cooperation Officer, the lead guy or gal, and you do OJT. So you learn that way. And it honestly was the best way to learn. You don't learn the attaché side that much of the house, because the Defense Intelligence Agency is very hush-hush about it. So we learned a lot about the SCO. The Army also gives you a $40,000 limit to travel the region that you're going to be working in, because we're all regionalized. So you travel to wherever you need to in the region to get to know the region, because you're supposed to be a regional expert. And to be a regional expert, you can't only be an expert on the military and the politics, but you have to know the country as well. So to include like traveling to the Amazon jungle in Brazil. We went to the Amazon jungle in Brazil to learn about the Amazon. Now we also visited military units there, but we got to learn that region. We traveled to Chile. My wife was became pregnant with our first child there. So she didn't go on a couple trips with me, but Argentina, Mexico, all over the place, just traveling and getting to know the region. And then you also run different programs out of the embassy that you're working in. So I ran what was called Beyond the Horizons. It was essentially constructing 6 schools and 1 medical laboratory in El Salvador, which at that time had the highest murder rate in Latin America, because that's when the gangs, the MS-13 and the 18th Street gangs really started their dominance, projecting their dominance. They had dominance throughout the country before then, but they really started projecting their dominance at that time throughout El Salvador. So these projects were helping the Salvadoran government build schools in these places where it needed to be done in order to confront the gangs.
So at some point, your wife went back home at the end of her tour, and then...
So she never deployed.
Okay.
She decided, because we decided for her to resign her commission, they ended up not even deploying her. Okay. So she got out summer of 2013. And then from there we went to DC for language school.
So after you completed your training school, I guess, not on the job experience,
mm-hmm.
then where did you go? You went to Ecuador then, or
no?
That was in Ecuador. You did.
I did my training in El Salvador,
okay.
And then from there, part of the Foreign Area Officer program is you have to do your master's, because now in the military, to make it to lieutenant colonel, you have to have your master's, 1, and then 2, you have to do your master's that's focused on. You have to have at least 61% of your studies have to be focused on your region. So we chose to go to University of California, San Diego. They had a 1-year executive master's program on Latin America. So I did a 1-year executive master's. My wife we decided that the most portable career, because you have American international schools next to all the embassies, or some sort of international school, she decided to pursue teaching for math. So I was doing my master's in public relations with an emphasis on Latin America, and she was studying to become a high school math teacher at the University of California, San Diego for a year.
So when you wrote your master paper, it was on the...
So I specifically chose UCSD to not have to do a thesis. Now, that said, there is a group project at the end of it, but it was we were 5 people, but there were really only 4 because one guy didn't help at all. And we focused on the peace accords between the Colombian government and the AUC, which is one of the other guerrilla groups that conducted peace negotiations with the government of Colombia.
Now, you got a chance to come back home then, before you were...
So my first foreign area officer assignment was with U.S. Army South out of Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. And at the ASCC, the Army Service Component Command level, they are in charge of security cooperation, land cooperation with all of Latin America. So basically, as the desk officer, or the political military advisor to the commanding general, what we would do, and I worked a whole bunch of different countries, and we have what's called bilateral staff talks with 5 nations throughout Latin America. That's where we have an agreement that we're going to conduct X amount of exercises a year, X amount in that country and X amount in the United States. The United States is going to pay for A, the country is going to pay for C. So I worked many of the staff talk countries and would travel frequently. My son was 1 and we left there when he was 4, and I probably missed half of his life because I was traveling. I was always gone. I was always traveling throughout Latin America, or I would meet generals from a different country at a base somewhere in the U.S. So that they could do some investigative work and to see what that unit could help them with, and so on and so forth.
Where were you off to from that point after you've completed that?
So after Fort Sam Houston, towards the end of my tour, I was selected to be the U.S. Army attaché to Ecuador. So from there, in July of 2019, we PCS'd back to DC, and because attaché school is only 4 months, that's a TDY. So regardless of your language score, if you could be a native speaker, but in order to get people to PCS to DC, in order to do JMAS, which is Joint Military Attaché School, versus a TDY, which is very costly, they put people in language courses. So we got to DC in July, August of 19, did language school until January of 2020, and then from there I was doing an internship, so to speak, at DIA headquarters with the small element that ran the Andean Ridge, which was Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, which we didn't have anybody in Venezuela, but we still had to include them. I was doing an internship there, and from January, it was supposed to be from January to April, and then we were supposed to start Joint Military Attaché School in April, and towards the end of March, I was going to go down to Ecuador, or the family, we were actually just all going to go, to do a little handover with the person I was replacing, because she was going to be leaving before I got there. And then, as we all know, come March of 2020, COVID started spreading throughout the world and shut everything down.
So, when did you get to Ecuador?
So, we ended up being the first. So, all JMAS classes were shut down. The one that was in session shut down for a little bit, and then they did some virtual stuff and a hodgepodge of different things. So, my class was the first JMAS class, and we started in July, I believe. So I was essentially off from March until July, just waiting. I think we started in July, and of course everybody's masked, and they had to make all the precautions and everything, but we still ran the courses if it would have been ran before. Historically, they did multiple days of classes where the spouses were present, because spouses are a very big part of the attaché world, but we couldn't do that because of COVID, so the spouses had separate classes, at different times, and we finished at the end of October, and we got to Ecuador on November 10th of 2020. And when we got there, the memory of COVID in Ecuador is a lot different than the memory of COVID in the United States because of the resources. So in Ecuador, they were still very strict with COVID at that time. I mean, there were a lot of places in the States that were full capacity, everything was open. Ecuador, I don't think it really normalized until right before we left, 3.5 years later, because they were putting bodies on the streets. There were no resources for ambulances to come get the bodies. There were no morgues that had room. They had no coffins, so people were putting their loved ones on the streets with sheets or boxes. So we got there November 2020. 2 weeks later is when I really started kind of getting out and doing things. And even at that, it was limited because the embassy was only allowed to operate at 30% capacity based on the government of Ecuador's input. So we had 2 teams of the attaché group. There were 4 attachés total, and we would just rotate on teams, but we couldn't be around each other because if one team got sick, the other team had to be able to operate. So that's how we ran it until summer of 21, I believe, when they finally increased it to about 60% capacity in the embassy. And then, even until spring of 22, I think it was, you were still wearing masks in the park, still wearing masks outside, driving by yourself wearing a mask. It was still very restricted.
Now, when you would go out with these teams, what kind of intelligence were you gathering or communicating with these different units?
So the biggest thing as an attaché is you're there to be the representative of your branch of service. So I was there to be the representative of the United States Army to the Ecuadorian Army. So the first meeting I had to have was with the Ecuadorian Army commander to introduce myself and get to know him a little bit, and then I had to meet all the different generals. Typically speaking, in an embassy, you have a security cooperation office, which is in charge of conducting military to military exchanges with that country. In 2012, the leftist president, Rafael Correa, had expelled the military security cooperation office from Ecuador, but in 2019, the president, Lenin Moreno, who was actually the leftists' vice president, but then switched 90 days after he came into presidency, he switched back to the right, not hard right, but more center right, and requested that we reopen the Security Cooperation Office. When we got there, that was a year after he had requested it, and we had 2 people in that office and 3 civilians. So I had to work the Southcom, Southern Command side, which would have been the Security Cooperation portion for the Army, and the attaché portion for the Army, which in all reality gave me great placement and access because I'd have these generals ask me for things. I would go to the people in the Security Cooperation Office, say, hey, I just saved you an hour by conducting this meeting. These are the things they're asking for. I'm going to save you another hour. So just give me this information and I'll go save you another hour so you don't have to go to that meeting, and deliver it to them, which builds my reputation with them. So it worked out really well. To the point that when we finally did get an Army section chief in there, who's a great friend of mine, he's a phenomenal officer, but I had put my tentacles in so deep that they still wouldn't go to him. They would still come to me to get the information. So that every area was different. Ecuador historically was a very, very peaceful country. It was kind of viewed as the gem of Latin America. But what people didn't realize is that was at a cost. So the former leftist president, Rafael Correa, had made deals with the narcos. Some of the road networks there that were built from the jungle into the capital city out to the ports, which everybody praised him for, were funded by the narcos. And the deal was, hey, you build these things, you fund these things, I leave you alone. You don't do anything on the streets. You operate in the shadows. You don't bury bodies on the streets. You don't put corpses on the streets. You bury them in the jungle or you put them out to the ocean. So he was praised by the lower income personnel because he used a lot of those resources to help fund social programs for the lower income personnel, which they viewed as great. But he was expelled from the country in 2019, and he now lives in Belgium still to this day lives in Belgium with his wife, who's a Belgian citizenship. So every area was a little different. I never encountered, there was a lot of people that said there's a heavy anti-American sentiment there, and I never really encountered that much. I encountered an anti-imperialist settlement, which Correa passed about the U.S. government. But everywhere I traveled throughout the country, and there wasn't one whole of the country that I didn't touch, or one section, and I just never saw it. Same with El Salvador. The thing we saw with those two countries, and what I never understand about our initiatives and policies with foreign policy, is that our culture is so ingrained in those countries because there are so many of them here. So, like when we lived in El Salvador, their number one income for all their families were remittances from the United States. So even though El Salvador knew we had caused their gang problem, they didn't hold it against us because most of the monies came from the United States. And Ecuador was very similar. They knew that we had to be intertwined with them and had to keep close relationships. So in the countryside, a lot of it was looking at different things that Correa was doing and initiatives from him. On the northern border, it was to try and help them conduct exchanges with Colombia, who they were not allowed to talk to for so long, but the United States was very involved with Colombia. On the southern border, it was a lot of trying to get information about illegal mining. On the coast, which is predominantly where the Navy and Coast Guard attaché went, it was getting intelligence about different routes that the narcos were using or different ports that they were using, how they were trying to control them. In the capital of Quito, it was all the above. I had a colonel, Robert Wagner, Wags, who told me who I worked for in El Salvador and then again in Army South. And when I got selected to be an attaché, he said, anyone that asked to meet with you, you'd take that meeting. So I did. And 7 out of 10 times, it was probably useless. I'd take them out to a dinner, a lunch, whatever, go have a drink with them, and it was useless. I got nothing from it. But those other 3 times, it ended up being very interesting.
At some point, your military career was starting to come to an end. Go into that a little bit.
So, my wife and I always wanted to retire in Colorado. And when we originally left Colorado to go to El Salvador, we kept our house for a couple of years, realized it was too much, just too difficult to deal with, so we sold it. And then in 2019, March of 19, we bought some land, 5 acres in northern Colorado Springs, just to have and keep, because we knew we wanted to call Colorado home. As I was getting past the 20 years, we started to talk. And my wife became pregnant in Ecuador with our daughter, Maya, who's now 3.5. And we just kind of started to talk a lot more about it. And we said in December of 21, we decided for me to go to what they call TAPS. So it's the Transition Assistance Program. Just to see what was there, just to see what it was, because at that time you couldn't submit your retirement paperwork until you were 12 months out from retiring, so I knew I couldn't submit until summer of 22. We said, you know what, let me go check it out and see what it was, because we were already kind of leaning that way. And then I went and did the TAPS course in Fort Carson, Colorado, because they send you wherever you want to go if you're overseas. And when I came back, it was like, you know what, we're done, let's go, because we didn't know. All we knew about our next assignment, which was coming up in summer of 23, was that they wanted us to stay overseas. The 2 places we would want, Chile or Argentina, were not going to be open. We didn't want to go to Colombia. Ecuador and Colombia are very similar, although Colombia is a lot more functional than Ecuador. And Chile and Argentina were really the only 2 that we would have wanted to go to. And they weren't going to be open. 2, I was going to be coming up on promotion. So we knew it would be at least another 4 years if I wanted to get those retirement benefits. So once I came back from the TAPS course, we said, you know what, let's go. And at that same time, that same January, is when the Army changed their paperwork processing for retirement from 12 months to you can submit 24 months out. So I submitted a 1.5 years out in order to retire. We had extended in Ecuador for 6 months, to stay until summer of 23, summer of 24, yeah. Only because there was a government civilian job, a GS job coming open in the Security Cooperation Office that my boss in Air Force 06, amazing human being and amazing leader, said, no, I want Paula. She's already here. She's got the contacts because it was within the SCO, so it was a lot of mill-to-mill cooperation for the humanitarian assistance and program manager. She had the language. She was there. She had the clearance because she worked for State Department at the time. So it was literally a step in. So I was at the point then to extending so that she could have 2 years in that job. Well, we extended, and then the guy who was in the job decided he wasn't going to quit. So we extended for nothing. So I talked to my boss before I submitted anything because I truly honored, valued, and respected the man. I said, here's the deal, Colonel Gomez, I need to retire. Like, it needs to be done. But I understand we put in for an extension. I would still like to retire at the time of the end of that extension, but I will need to leave here in like February because I've got 60 days of leave on the books, and then when you're overseas, the Army gives you an extra 30 days to go back to a post to out-process the Army. He was in agreement, and I dropped all the paperwork, and then in April of 23, my wife got a job working out of Schriever Air Force Base, Schriever Air Force Base under a missile defense contract, and she moved back in April of 23 in order to start that, and our house had just finished because we decided to build the house the year before because prices were going to go up and we were just going to handle the mortgage. But then when we decided to retire, she moved back and started living in the house, and I stayed in Ecuador with the kids.
So after your career ended, you did receive a prestigious medal. Could you go into that?
So I received a military commendation from the Ecuadorian Conjunto, or Joint Command, which is the same as our Joint Command. And for the U.S. Army, I received the Legion of Merit. The Ecuadorian one, honestly, to me is more precious, just because of the work that I did with them. We did a lot of work hand in hand. We stood up. In Ecuador was interesting in the way you had to maneuver things because there was still a lot of leftist sentiment stuck in. So you always had to know kind of who the belly button was behind the scene when you were told no to get it back to come around to yes. So I received an award from them because of that, specifically I think more for a call center that we stood up. It was called the Department of Defense Rewards Program, which is a intelligence center basically that was run between the military and the police and was manned 24/7. And the reason it was run by the military and police because the police handle everything within 15 kilometers inside of the border, and the military handles everything within 15 kilometers from whatever border it is or ocean in. And they can be tasked for internal security depending on what's going on. And that took 2.5 years to stand up because of all the politics. So the Army commander of Ecuador that put me in for it was an integral part of it. He was an engineer by trade, and I'd worked with him when he was a colonel. Actually, when I got there, I met him when he was a colonel, and he made it all the way up to Army commander by the time I left. So I think that call center and the impact that call center had in Ecuador was the predominant reason. I would have been put in for something regardless, but I was put in for something higher than the other attachés.
When you came home, what transpired at that time?
I mean, I came back to both my wife and I were excited to come back to the United States. Ecuador is beautiful. We made a lot of really good friends, but it's very third world. And we left during COVID, and COVID was just loosening up in the U.S., and then we came back to a completely different United States. You know, when we moved to Ecuador, groceries were cheaper in the United States than in Ecuador. Because groceries are expensive there unless you go to the local markets, and then the quality is very subpar. So to come back to the U.S., that was completely different. It took a while. And I had from February until May 30th to fully return, no, April 30th, sorry. to fully retire. I started work as a contractor about 30 days after I got back, but it was just it was weird. It was weird, and we went from living in the center of the city in Quito in an apartment building where we made some really close local friends that lived 3 floors below us, to living on 5 acres of solitude in Black Forest, Colorado, which was a nice adjustment, but it was an adjustment.
So you have 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
At the present, they are
9.5 and 3.5.
9.5, 3.5. Are you presently working anywhere else?
Yes, I'm currently working for a company called LMI as a deputy program manager, and they do tech sales, not necessarily hardware, but more software pieces and software development to the Department of Defense.
Well, at this time, I would like to thank you for your service to this nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.